So Crash Team Rumble can be very chaotic at times, with so many things happening at once, which is why in this video I'll be sharing with you 27 of the most important beginner tips and tricks so that you win more games or at least know what to finally do. First off, let's talk about the part before we enter a match. You'll notice that in the options menu, there is an option to turn on bank arrow. This is extremely useful as the game will now show you where your own team's bank is. The more Wumpas you hold, the bigger the arrow will be. Now this is very useful especially for beginners who are new to the game who sometimes get lost in very confusing maps like City Scrape for example. This option will ensure that you always know where your bank is so you won't waste time in aligning yourself and guessing where it is because every second counts in Crash Team Rumble. Tip number 2 is to always check your character challenges. This provides massive amount of EXP to your character if you complete its task. It is also a great way to try out something new and figure out what your character can really do. Tip number 3 is to pay attention to the weekly missions as they provide you with a huge amount of EXP for your Battle Pass. The Battle Pass is already very hard to level up in this game, so grabbing any additional EXP will surely be very useful. Tip number 4 is to try your best to utilize the double EXP bonus, happening every Friday, Saturday and Sunday. Again, leveling up could be a challenge, so this will speed things up so much more, especially if you're looking to unlock that sweet legendary skins. And the final tip during the pre-match is to check out the game's guide in the settings once in a while. It shows you all of the basic details you need to know, plus the badge sections which shows you what you can do to earn more badges, aka more EXP per round. Now you don't have to go through every single thing because there are literally too many of them, but knowing what is possible can be pretty nice. Next up, if going through the game guide is not your style, let's move on to the general gameplay tips that you need to know to get ahead. Continuing to tip number 6, you need to know that every character can hold different amounts of Wumpa fruits. And no, it is not tied to your class. For example, Embryo and Dingodile are both the blocker class. However, Embryo can only hold a maximum amount of 90 Wumpa fruits, while Dingodile can hold 110 Wumpa fruits. So yeah, remember that each characters are different, and you can see roughly how much Wumpa fruits they can carry at this Wumpa meter at the character selection screen. Which brings us to tip number 7, which is to head back early if you are banking in. Now let me explain. You need to know how many Wumpa fruits your character can hold, so that when it is halfway filled up, you need to start heading back to your bank while collecting Wumpa fruits on the way. For example, going back to Dingodile, Dingodile can hold a maximum of 110 Wumpa fruits, so when you hit about 50 or 60 Wumpa fruits, it is time to head back to your bank. This will ensure that you don't waste time because I see so many people wait until they hold a maximum amount of Wumpa fruits and then only start heading back to their bank, which is not really efficient if you think about it. So especially if you are a scorer who wants to score Wumpas for your team, remember to plan your route efficiently and do this method by heading back early and collect Wumpa fruits on the way back so to make sure you don't waste any more time. Tip number 8, just in case you don't know, the grey meter in the scoreboard are the number of Wumpa fruits that the team is currently holding that hasn't been deposited into their bank yet. In short, the bigger the grey meter, the more Wumpas are at risk for them. Therefore, if you see the enemy has a large grey meter, it is probably a great idea to start getting in their way before they bank in that huge amount of Wumpa fruits. Tip number 9, no stealing. Now, we all know that hitting enemies will reduce the number of Wumpa fruits they are carrying. However, not many people know that it only does that. You are not stealing the Wumpa fruits and adding it into your inventory, so just a little something I want to put out there. Tip number 10, if you are trying to stop the enemies from banking in, you must knock them up or away from the bank. Just hitting them will not interrupt the depositing process. This is why you need to know which skills your character has that can knock back opponents. A few examples are Crash Sliding Kick, Embryo's Slime Flask, and Dingodile's Normal Attack. Tip number 11 is a pretty simple one, but do not die. Now there is actually more to this than you think. If for example you fell off the map, you will lose all of your hard-earned Wumpa fruits and all of the relics that you are holding. Now, if you are killed by someone else, something interesting happens. Yes, you will lose all of your Wumpa fruits and relics that you are holding. However, the relics are now given to the enemy that just killed you. So if for example you have 12 relics and someone killed you, that relic has now all gone to that enemy. So be extremely careful of who you fight because relics is a very valuable resource. And for tip number 12, most of you probably already know this, but your HP will auto-regenerate if you don't take damage for a certain amount of time. So combine it with a previous tip, it is always better to disengage and recover from a losing fight than to give your life and everything away. Now that is it for the general gameplay, and now we're gonna move on to some tips in terms of the characters. Now tip number 13, be flexible. Now we all know that there are 3 classes to play from, which are the Scorer, Boosters and Blockers. Scorer aims to score more points, Booster aims to support their team with buff, and Blockers aims to disrupt the enemy team. Now while all of this is pretty straightforward, you can be flexible with it if it makes sense, which means that you don't have to follow exactly 100% of the time of what your class do. For example, if your team is missing a Booster, you can actually use Crash, who is originally a Scorer, to play as a Booster because of how fast he can move around and maneuver in the air. Another example is Neocortex. Instead of a Booster, he can be played as a Blocker as well because of his extremely high damaging combo and his ability to weave in and weave out of battle. In summary, don't get stuck in doing only one task because that will most often than not do more harm than good if your team is not prepared for it. Tip number 14, recharging your power faster. Now before going into a match, you can pick which powers to bring in with you. They are extremely useful, however they have a cooldown every time you use them. In order to recharge them faster so you can use them again, you must perform your class's main goal. For example, as a Scorer, your power will recharge faster if you score Wumpas in the bank. As a Booster, your power will recharge faster if you capture a gem pad or activate a relic station for your team. As a Blocker, your powers will recharge faster every time you reduce your opponent's Wumpas by damaging them. This is where you need to find the balance between being flexible from the previous tip and being focused in your class. I'd highly recommend for you to just focus on your main task of your class, especially if you are newer to the game. Only then you may start branching off and do other things once you are more familiar to the game. Tip number 15, character and power combinations. Now there are a total of 7 powers in the game so far that you can bring in with you. You can only pick one of these powers every match, so it is very important to know that some powers work better with certain characters. For example, Dingodile is a Blocker which focuses on disturbing the enemy. Taking in the Desmoxian Guard or the Healing Refrigerator will work much better than bringing in a Wumpa Stash power-up. On the other hand, Catbat is a Scorer which focuses on banking in Wumpa fruits, so bringing the Wumpa Stash would make more sense for him because it helps him in his goal. I'll be making another video on recommended powers for each character, so stay tuned on that, but anyhow, you need to experiment and think through first on what you're gonna do and what you want to bring in before every single match. Next up, tip number 16 is to understand that some characters work better in certain maps. For example, Catbat can jump multiple times, so maps with high verticality like Insanity Caverns or Cityscape will do him wonders. Whereas Coco is an extremely fast movement style character, so she would be very suited for maps with more open areas like Just Beachy or Tar Valley. But of course, you are free to use any characters in any map, there is no restriction to that. Just be mindful of some of the struggles you might face along the way. Tip number 17, the movesets. Make sure to go through each and every moveset your character has. Like I said before, you need to know which moves are the highest damage, which moves can help you run away, which of them can knock away enemies, etc. This way you have a solution to every problem because you understand how your character works. Now that is it for the character section. I will be making a more detailed guide for each characters in the near future, so stay tuned for that. But now let's move on to the next section, which are the gem pads. For team number 18, you need to understand that gem pads are extremely important. If you're nearby one and you see one that you are able to capture, do so because they give bonus Wumpa banking rate if you capture them. There are usually 3 gem pad sections in each map, namely A, B and C. Each of them gives you 30% Wumpa bonus if you capture them, and if you capture all 3, that is a 100% bonus. So make sure that you capture them as a priority, especially if you are a booster class. Now tip number 19 for gem pads, it only takes 1 touch to turn them blue. After that, the gem pads will take some time to capture. During this process, if you see someone stealing your gem pads, simply knock them away because it takes some time for them to turn into red. So make sure that you try your best to defend it before it turns red, which restarts the entire process again. Tip number 20. Did you know that there is an indicator to show you when the next gem pad will be available? Now after your gem pad buff expires, they will be unusable for quite some time. However, when they are starting to reactivate again to be captured, you will see this indicator here showing you which gem pads are reactivating soon. This is a great way to know where exactly you need to be and when you need to be there to capture the gem pad once more. Tip number 21. Stationary powers like the Fly Trap and Gasmoxian Guard can capture gem pads as well. Do note that they are also able to block enemies from capturing it, which makes a great power for boosters to carry. Tip number 22 is that Embryo is pretty good at capturing gem pads, mainly because of his slime buddies. Same as the stationary powers, his slime monsters are able to capture and defend gem pads as well. And as an additional note, he is the only character in the game that can capture multiple gem pads at the same time without the Fly Trap and Gasmoxian Guard. And finally, let's move on to the tips for relic stations, starting off with tip number 23, which is that relic stations can be used more than once. Not many people know about this, but let's say you activated Kapunowa, and Kapunowa's power expires after a few seconds. You can head back to that same relic station that you activated to get Kapunowa again. I didn't know this as a beginner, so I hope that this is an eye-opener for some of you. Tip number 24. Not all relic stations spawn at the same time. For example, Epic Relic Station, which costs 30 relics to activate, only spawns out a few minutes into the match. Another example is that the Flamethrower Relic Station in the map Rusted Refinery, this one doesn't spawn at the beginning as well, as you have to wait a few minutes for the relic station to finally appear. So don't be surprised if you don't see it appear in the first few minutes of the match. Tip number 25. Remember that you can activate defensive relic stations at your enemy's base as well. This is not only used for defensive purposes at your bank, but it is also a way for you to activate it at your enemy's bank to stop them from banking in their Wumpas. So if you have some relics to spare, this is usually a very good idea. Tip number 26. Once you have activated an epic relic station, you can actually see how long the effect will last on the top left side here. This is an amazing way to plan out what you're gonna do and actually know when the power will actually expire. Tip number 27, you can only hold a maximum of 15 relics, regardless of what characters you are playing. So don't expect to save up for the quote-unquote perfect timing to use them. You can always collect more in the meantime, and using them will always benefit your team way more than just holding on to it. So that is all the 27 tips for beginners. And hey, this game actually has 9 maps in total, and each of them play very differently. So if you want to know what to do exactly in all of these maps and how you can take advantage in every one of them to win more matches, click on the video you see on the screen right now. You don't want to miss this one.